Okay, we are live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Making Online Learning Accessible. My name is Rhiannon Gutierrez, and I'm the Director of Digital Learning for BPS Technology. And joining me is Nick Gonzalez, Digital Learning Specialist, and he will be posting questions in the chat as well as answering any questions that you have. I will also be trying to answer your questions in real time. If I miss it at that moment, do not fret. I will get back to it at some point, okay? Again, please use that chat to ask any questions that you have. If this is your first or fifth webinar with us, please know that we record all of our webinars so that you can reference them at a later date. We will be sharing both the slides and the recording with you after today's presentation, as well as a feedback form or the reflection form. Because if you are interested in earning credit for the webinars that you attend with us, you will need to fill out this form. We also ask that because there are many of us here, we don't know everyone in the room, to please use your name instead of having an ID number, because that will help us identify you and know where the questions are coming from. And again, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. I will have everyone muted, but we will also have some time to unmute you so you can ask some of those questions. So some of our objectives for today are to learn about best practices for making accessible online content. And this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart as a longtime user of captions as well as some other accessibility tools. We're also going to explore what some of those resources are so that you can create accessible content across platforms. So that can be things that you create with documents, with videos, with websites, with images, and the like, because there's lots of different ways that we can create content or pull content that we need to make sure is accessible. There is a hashtag if you are interested in learning more about some best practices around accessibility in social media, and that hashtag is A11Y, and that's because there are 11 letters in between the A and the Y for accessibility. So if you want to extend your learning, I definitely recommend checking that out online. So why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because really, if you think about it, designing for the margins benefits everyone. Some examples of where this comes into play are curb cuts, elevators, and closed captioning. So curb cuts were intended for a specific audience, but they actually help many people. I'm sure all of us utilize those curb cuts. Captions definitely help us out a lot. I can tell you that it's not just for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It also supports with language development. It's also really good if you are in a quiet room and you just don't want to make a lot of noise. So you want to think of some interesting uses of captions for yourself or for the students you work with. Also elevators. I said earlier that when we were transporting all these thousands of Chromebooks, we sure needed elevators to move them around. So we all can benefit from all three of these objects. With that being said, many of us are already familiar with Universal Design for Learning and some of its principles. So effective networks, thinking about the why of learning, how we can engage learners and keep them motivated in a task. We also want to make sure that whatever it is that we present to learners taps into those recognition networks and make things accessible for them. So it's really hard for students to engage with something if it's not accessible from the start. I can tell you this for me. If you ask me to watch a video and it's not accessible, forget it. And with that being said, I can probably watch the video, but this goes into the strategic networks, the how of learning. If I spend so much time trying to process something, am I going to have any energy to therefore react to the task? Am I going to be able to do what you want me to do, to be able to write something, to be able to engage in meaningful conversation? This is really important. And even when we think about ways to respond to things, we also want to give our learners options. Maybe them talking aloud isn't the best option. Maybe them using things like nonverbal feedback or using a chat feature might be more helpful. So these are all things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to designing in online spaces, especially given that students are probably quite exhausted. Maybe even you're exhausted because there's just so much input everywhere. And you're also being asked to give a lot of output as well. So you have to find that balance in choosing the best content and resources for yourself, your colleagues, and your students. We are going to go over quite a few things today, and it might feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, but I want to share all of these things with you so you can think about, okay, what isn't that you can use and apply today that your students need or that you and your colleagues need. When I say this, I say maybe you're interacting with a lot of documents, maybe videos, maybe websites, and how can you make one of those things a little bit more accessible and easy to navigate? So keep that in mind as you move forward in learning about all the things I'm about to show you right now. First up are documents. So we're quite familiar with Google Docs, but let me tell you, not all Google Docs are created equal. Not all of them are accessible. Some of them just have too much text. Some of them are disorganized. Some of them use too much tables. So we can find ways to simplify them and make them better for ourselves and our students. Here are some tips for you. Consider using headers. Headers are really, really important because if you have headers, it makes it much easier to navigate that document. I'm not simply talking about making your text bigger, because if you're a sighted person, that means something to you. I'm talking about actually labeling your headers as headers. So if you go into a Google Doc, you might notice something near the top left corner that talks about making normal text into a header. So that's what I mean by labels. And that actually goes into a table of contents. By creating those headers, you also create a table of contents. If you're a frequent reader of ebooks, Erin is in the room. Erin probably knows about the ebooks. You want to be able to click around and get to the chapters that you want to be able to go to, rather than having to scroll through everything. So table of contents are really, really helpful in conjunction with headers. You also want to consider the use of tables very sparingly. Now, we love tables in BPS technology, but we try not to use them too much because they can get overwhelming. So consider why and when they can be used. Also, Nick would tell you this very well, that the use of visuals in documents is so important, because if we have too much text, especially if you're an English learner or just someone who just needs to be able to navigate a document better, using visuals is so helpful.
Yeah, can I
And
jump in here real quick? I'm sorry,
go
Rhiannon.
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say and add to this, the UDL and what everything that Rhiannon is going over right now is very applicable to English language learners. Obviously, obviously taking into consideration the ELD level of the student, but I'm sure anybody who's taught ESL or has learned another language, when you have a page full of text, it's very daunting and can be very intimidating. That's why the use of, simplifying some of the text using headers and tables of contents and especially visuals is very, very useful for English language learners and for ESL teachers.
Absolutely. And Google makes it really easy for you to do that, whether you're using slideshows or documents, by going where it says insert. I can, demo this in real time, and then go to image, and it gives you multiple sources for you to be able to insert those images. Additionally, if you're familiar with a tool called Read and Write for Google Chrome, it's that purple puzzle piece that you tend to see in the top right corner, the Chrome browser. If you activate that, it will give you quite a few options to use. And one of those options is the picture dictionary. So utilizing it to help you explain things really clearly for your learners. For example, I just said tables, and these are some options there. Now, obviously, the tables I'm referring to are not the first image, they're the second or third image. So utilizing things like Read and Write or the insert feature in Google Slides and Docs makes it really easy for you to make that document accessible for your students. You can also use page numbers, because if you say go to page 8, go to page 9, people know where to go in the document, and that's really helpful. Another thing that you want to consider, especially if you're going to be integrating images, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, is the use of alt text. So you're essentially describing an image. If you are not a sighted person, you need alt text, because you're probably familiar with devices called screen readers that allow you to navigate. I have to tell you, in this day and age, maybe you're not working with this learner, but I have been getting emails from people who are working with learners who do need to use screen readers. And one of the things you can do as a teacher is to make it easier for that learner to navigate whenever they're doing anything online. So with that being said, alt text, if you are working within a Google Doc or a Google slideshow, you would select your image just like I did right now. Right click it, and then you'll see a few options on there. Alt text is right in front of you. If you click on that, that's where you can add that description of that image, and you would put it in the title. So I'll say Google Docs icon, because that's exactly what it is. And you want to keep it simple. You don't need that many words because it all relates to what it is you're trying to convey. Nick, if you wouldn't mind, actually just posting a link to this entire slide deck in the chat, because I'm actually going
Sure
to
thing.
share quite a lot of links with you right now. And I think it'll just be easier for you to just have the link to everything. So there is a document that helps you with some of those best practices in document accessibility on slide number 6 in the chat. All right, with that being said about docs, a lot of what I mentioned here also applies to slideshows, because when we create slideshows, we want to consider the use of visuals. Just like Nick said, you want the visuals to be meaningful, you want them to be coherent, you want them to be clear, because sometimes we might find a really fun visual, but it's super tiny, and that makes it really hard. So we want to choose something that is very crisp and easy for the learner to understand. Also, another thing that we want to keep in mind when we use slideshows is not to have too much text. If you do have a bit of text, you want to try to break it up a little bit so people can process that. Additionally, we want to consider contrast and not applying too much meaning and color alone. Here's what I mean by that. For example, if I were to stand maybe about 12 feet away from this computer, or even half that distance from this computer, am I going to be able to read the slides, or am I going to be squinting? If you don't have enough contrast, you're going to be squinting. You want to make it easy for people to read it. Also, with that being said, you don't want to have meaning in the color alone. I say this because if you say, click the green box, click the red box, if someone in your classroom is colorblind, they're not going to know what you mean by that. So you can apply something such as texture or different font sizes or styles. For example, you could say it's a green box that has a squiggly line around it. So you have two things at play there instead of just one for people to find what they need. And this also doesn't just apply to online learning. This applies really to just anything that might be in the room. Additionally, please also consider the use of alt text. What I showed you on the docs slide also applies to Google Slides, just making sure that you define what that image is. You also really want to make sure that the links are easily accessible. For example, making them shorter. If you have a link that is docs.google.com/presentation54321, that's too long for people to process. So we have a URL shortener that Nick can post in the chat called bit.ly. We really recommend it. You can get a free account, and it allows you to create those shortened links for your presentations, especially if you want to share them with multiple people. And another thing that's actually pretty cool, I'm not demoing this right now because I'm doing a lot of clicking around, but if you were to actually be using Google Slides in present mode, I'll show you this now, you can actually activate captioning for those slides. However, the only caveat is that you have to be in present mode the entire time. If you were to exit present mode, those captions would disappear. You also cannot save them. So they are intended more for real time. So I'm in present mode, I go to the lower left corner and I turn on those captions. The accuracy of the captions is pretty good. It's up there with Otter because it is using artificial intelligence to really pull as much as they can from what they recognize. So if you are in a slide presentation and you were to make it full screen, you would see the captions here. And this is really good, especially if you might be working with smaller groups of learners who need that support. But if you are using this as a replacement for captioning your videos, I do not recommend that. There is another method I recommend for recording and captioning videos. This is just for the real-time captioning for students. Okay.
Rhiannon, can I say something about slides as well, please?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of the ESL take on slides, and what Rhiannon said about UDL a little earlier about teaching to the margins benefits everyone. Yeah, just like you would with a Google Doc, trying to use visuals on your slides is as important, if not more important, than crowding with text. You don't know how many presentations that Rhiannon and I have been to where there's just an entire slide full of text. And once I see that, even as a native speaker, I turn off. And so, I've read some great books on on presenting and teaching with slides, and a lot of them say use as little words as possible and use as many images as possible, because it's just a better way of presenting and a better way of using the tool. Too much text on the slide deck is daunting and very intimidating, especially to second language learners or English language learners.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Nick. Because I can get overwhelmed. I mean, these days we're giving so much information. We're being sent so many emails, presentations, websites, and the like. And the more text there is, the more I just turn away because I just can't process it. So this really applies to anyone, not just students with significant needs. All right. The next thing that I want to share with you is about making your images accessible. So earlier you heard me mention something called alt text. So a little bit more about what that means. For example, if you want to have an image, whether it's something as simple as an icon or as complex as the diagram that you see on the left side of this slide, you have to be really careful with how you describe it. For example, when we look at this image, we have to consider things like the context. Where is this image living? Is it living in a presentation that's about cells, about biology, about nature, about Earth, about human anatomy? Where is this living? You want to make sure you keep it short and specific. Use 4 to 10 words to describe it. So like the shorter the better. You also do want to consider who your target audience is. So if Nick were to be using this with a very specific group of students, you would want to make sure that they understand the words you're talking about. If they don't know what the word icon means, that's not going to mean much to them. You certainly don't want to say it's an image or a picture of. We already know that. You'd want to describe what it is, an image or a picture of. And also another thing is about interpretation. So when it comes to describing an image, like let's say I were to take an image of Nick smiling. I could say a happy man, or I could say a smiling man. Maybe Nick is smiling, that doesn't necessarily mean he's happy. He can have another emotion. He just looks like he's smiling, right? So you want to describe the action, not the feeling. That's really, really important because you want people to have that interpretation on their own. So someone posted in the chat about biology and bacteria, that absolutely. So you want to consider all of those contexts. Nick, would you mind reposting the link to the slides just in case? So this particular slide that I'm referencing, because it will be helpful for you to click on the link I share here on tips for alt text. This is on slide number 8, if you would like it. All right. With that being said, I also have some tips about PDFs. PDFs, all right, listen carefully. So when we see PDFs, there are a lot out there for PDFs, but not all PDFs are accessible. Whenever we read a PDF, we want to make sure that we're able to annotate it, to have it be read aloud, and to be translated. If you are someone who is working with high school students, they're probably interacting with PDFs far more than younger students might be. They're probably going to be interacting with PDFs the more they, are taking classes related to any subject. So whether they're going into the workforce or whether they're going to college, it is really important that we consider ways that we can play with these PDFs and interact with them. So I have a couple of suggestions for you to make them editable and interactive. So there are PDF readers that we suggest you use in BPS, and those are Adobe Acrobat. That's for the desktop. That's more for, I would say, people who are MacBook users. So if you have an L4L or if you have a PC, you could definitely utilize Adobe Acrobat. There's also TextHelp PDF Reader. You heard me mention earlier about Read and Write for Google Chrome. That is a powerful extension that works across websites, Google Docs, Google Slides, Forms, as well as in PDFs. But you do need to install an extra extension. This is not coming on your computers by default. You actually have to click on this link. Nick, if you wouldn't mind posting that in the chat. The TextHelp PDF Reader allows you to interact with those PDFs by annotating, highlighting, having them read back to you, marking them up, just all the things we want to do with a PDF. And your students have this accessible to them. If they were in a different district, they would not. So this is actually a tremendous value add for us. However, in order for us to even use the TextHelp PDF Reader or Adobe Acrobat, we need to make sure that PDF itself is made accessible. I posted this image on the left side of this scanned PDF, which is my least favorite PDF to work with because you can't do anything with this. So there's a couple ways I can make it accessible. I use a tool called Snapverter, which is an OCR tool, which basically means that it's making it accessible through this technology. And Snapverter is available to us. I think you can have maybe 10 uploads a week. So you should definitely use this very sparingly. There's also Office Lens and Text Grabber that you can use for your mobile devices, whether you're an iOS or Android user, to make text accessible. I would actually say you can apply the use of Office Lens and Text Grabber for things that you see in the environment. For example, if you go on a field trip or you're interacting with a pamphlet or signage of some sort, this is where you would take an image using your phone, and then those apps make it accessible for you to interact with online. Snapverter, on the other hand, is for you to use if you have documents that are already made available to you online. Basically, if someone emailed you a scanned PDF of something, you would use Snapverter. If there's any clarity needed with that, I'm also happy to talk further with you about your documents. One of the ways you could test to see if it's even accessible at all is, can you highlight anything? If you cannot, then you have to use one of those OCR tools. All right. With that being said, I do have a little pop quiz that you could post in the chat. So I have 4 usage of links here. Which one of these would you say is the best way to share a link? The first one, where here is hyperlinked. The second, where here is hyperlinked at the end. The third, where the entire thing is hyperlinked. Or the fourth one, where you have the URL all typed out. So which of those, 1, 2, 3, or 4, do you think is the best way to share a link? You can take a guess. Okay, I'm seeing some guesses here. All right. Any other guesses? First one here, second here, third entire thing, the fourth one, the URL. All right, we have a range. I think everyone is agreeing it's not number 2. All right, all set. Okay, so those are all really good guesses. And it can definitely depend on the context, but the best practice actually is number 3. I say that because number 3 is telling us where the link is going. That's why that's the correct answer. Because if you say here, you may have a document, for example, that has a lot of heres, but if you're not sighted, you're not going to know what I mean. However, if you say, watch the presentation 3 recording, you are telling us we are going to this link to watch a recording of something. The fourth one definitely tells you where you're going, but it also can be gibberish and super long, so it's not really the best to use because it looks messy. So the third one is cleaner. All right. Good job, everyone. All right, the next thing that I want to share with you is about audio and video. I'm actually really excited because there's been a couple of updates in this arena. So when it comes to audio and video accessibility, we think about things like transcripts, captions, subtitles. We also think about multiple spoken languages that we want to have access to. And we want to think about giving the user the option to pause and play and not have to be forced to sit through the whole thing. You want them to be able to navigate around if they can. So there's actually a couple documents that I want to share with you that you can use. So we've gotten a few inquiries from teachers who've actually asked us about how you can make the videos that you create accessible. And I'm going to take us to this particular link that shows how to add captions to a video. So this can be a video that you create or a video that someone else creates. And I have used these methods countless times, as well as my colleagues. So if you are interested in doing it yourself, we recommend for the computer users to use YouTube or Google Drive, because they both offer you the option to actually sync your transcript to make your video accessible. The only thing is you have to make sure you have a pretty good transcript in order to make it accurate. So if you want to use a computer to caption videos, those are the two we recommend. If you want to use your smartphone, this is actually really exciting because we're not always using the computer. Maybe we're going out of the environment. Maybe we want to do a selfie recording. It's really easy to do that if you utilize one of these three apps. Clips and Clip-O-Matic you can use on an iPhone, and AutoCap you can use on an Android. Now, I'm not an Android user, so I can't testify too much to the use of AutoCap. However, Clips and Clip-O-Matic are really good because not only does it automatically caption what you're saying, you can go in and you can edit it, and you can even add some fun titles if you like, especially if you're working with younger students. So those are the two methods for do-it-yourself. We also have a request for professional captions, but that would be recommended for videos that are over 10 minutes. And I say that because generally captioning a 10-minute video could take you about an hour. This is from our experience. But so if you go over that, we're talking about a lot of use of your time. So these are the different options we suggest depending on what it is you're creating. And you want to consider your target audience as well. Is this going to be for students? Is it going to be for colleagues? Is it going to be for both? But overall, having things made accessible is super important. So as far as that goes, so we talk a little bit about captions, because captions are basically transcribing the spoken word. Otter, which we're using on this other window, let me go back to the transcript so you can see it. Now this is actually generating a transcript. This is not synced on top of a video. This is another way you can provide access to anything that's being spoken. Now, let's say that you want to have multiple languages. That's where YouTube will come into play, because YouTube is really good about having you have multiple language options. So you can follow the same process that you use for captions to create subtitles on YouTube. Okay.
Can I say something about captions
Sure.
right here? If you can go back to the last slide, Rhiannon. They, you know, in terms of ESL, and I'm speaking about ESL and ELLs right now because my background is in ESL, and so I used a lot of these already, and I use them in my class, and I still use them in my class. I am on faculty at Monroe Community College as a ESL instructor, and I use a lot of captioning in my videos, and so I just can't stress how important it is that when you show a video or you show a movie or show media to ELLs, that it's really important to have them captioned, even if they've already flipped. You know, they've been here for a while. You know, some of your students have been here for a while. To have those captions in English for a piece of media that's in English is still very helpful. Outside of the whole subtitles version for the lower ELD levels, you know, as students move more towards flipping, you know, once they flip, you can still use captions, and the English captions, because they're really useful and they're really helpful to flipped English language learners.
Yes, thank you for that, Nick. Absolutely. Rather than waiting for someone to tell you, I need this, just turn them on. If they're available, turn them on. Look for videos that already have that built-in accessibility. I can tell you there's some YouTube channels that are excellent about that. Crash Course is one of them. TED is one of them. And there are probably a few others out there, but some don't even have the caption option at all. And some do, but it's definitely one of those automatic captioning situations. And I have to tell you this, I'm going to say this right now, so thanks for mentioning that, Nick, because this leads into accuracy, right? So if you see captions that are coming up, for example, as English auto-generated, that means that they are just coming up with their own, digital version, that they're not actually relying on humans to fix them. So with that being said, that means that you definitely need to check those out, because someone could be saying names in there, like different names. For example, my name is Rhiannon Gutierrez. I can tell you 100% my name is never spelled correctly. If you were to look at the Zoom transcript of my name, it doesn't come out as that. I don't even want to say what it comes out as, but it's not that. Nick knows what it is. So it's so important for you to actually look at the auto captions, because it can come out as a bad word. It really could, or come out as something that is negative or possibly racist or discriminatory. It's not trying to be. It's just like, it's a machine. A machine is doing this as opposed to a human. So I always say, despite the luxury of having the machine, you still need a human at the end of the day. So always check them out before you share with students. That I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay. That being said, more about video. We are doing this right now, we're utilizing video conferencing, and there's quite a few tips that we could share with you about making things accessible. So for example, we have, I'm gonna go back to full screen mode here. So we have a few tools that we're interacting with pretty regularly with video conferencing. Those tools include Zoom as well as Google Meet. If you use Google Meet, captions are already available there for you to turn on. If you use Zoom, you can do the Otter route or the Google Slides route like we're doing now. But some other things that are very, very useful are for you to turn your camera on. This is so important because it really gives that human touch. If you see me and I see you, I can see, oh, they're listening, they're paying attention, they're present with me. So I think that gives you like that nice feature. Also, not only that, but having your camera on, you being in a place where you're well lit. Now you can see I have some light on the side of me right here. If I were to angle so, then my face will get dark. So you want to make sure if your camera's on, we can also see you. You also should be utilizing the chat as much as you can. There's also commands for nonverbal feedback. If you wanted to use that now, if you go to the participants tab in this webinar, you'll notice that there's some features in there to raise your hand and do a thumbs up, or to do a thumbs down, something along those lines. So those features are really good for you to use with your students when you set those norms. You also want to make sure you're in a quiet space. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's so important. It can be hard in this current situation, but muting yourself when you're not speaking allows other people who are the dominant speakers to be heard. And recording for people to watch later. Now, if you are using Zoom through Clever with BPS, you cannot record. However, if you use tools like QuickTime or Flipgrid or some others, you can do some pre-recordings that you share with students to watch so that they can have access to something. We do have a few links that you can look at in the slide deck, and this is slide number 12. If you want to click on any of those links there, we talk about the features that Zoom and Meet have depending on what you're looking for. I can tell you from my own perspective, I do prefer Zoom because it just has, more controls and better video quality for someone like me who needs to see people's faces. But in terms of captioning, Google Meet wins that game. So far, they are leading that effort. All right, so we're almost near the end. One of the things I wanted to share too is about social media accessibility. Now, when we utilize social media, maybe some of us are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we're posting various things there to engage with our students, particularly if we are working with students who are age 13 and above. These things are really, really important. Utilizing plain language so people can understand. So not writing an academic speak on Twitter, just keeping simple sentences. Nick can speak to that, just really conveying your points very clearly. We also want to utilize camel case hashtags. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting, camel case hashtags is exactly what it says. I'm going to open the chat here if you want to look at it. Nick just posted, this is camel case. So if I were to do, this is camel case, all lowercase, it's really hard to read. So by actually capitalizing the first letter of your new word, you are making it easier for people to read it as a sentence, as opposed to saying, what are they trying to say? So camel case is really important if you are hashtagging anything on social media. You might be a Facebook user, an Instagram user, a Twitter user. This is really a tip you can take away and apply right now. The image descriptions are the same idea. If you were to use Twitter, you can definitely add image descriptions in. I'm not sure I'm actually signed into my account. Let's find out, and I could show you what I mean by all of those things I'm talking about. And Twitter is a very vibrant community for educators. Now, you might not want to be there for the politics, and I 100% understand that, but on Twitter, you choose to follow who you want to follow. You don't have to follow certain people you don't want. So if you follow educators there, you will find a lot of really fabulous resources related to remote learning. Yes, so Aaron asked a question about the captioning at the bottom of the webinar. So that only appears if I am in the present mode of Google Slides. All right. So now I'm on a different page right now, and I'm on Twitter. If I want to post something, I could say this, oops, it's a little slow. This is camel case. So you can hashtag like this, and then you can play with these different features down here. For example, I can add an image. It can be an image that comes from my computer, or I can pull it from the web, and I'll show you pretty much everything I'm talking about to make your post accessible. All right, I have a Netflix logo here. I'm not gonna actually make this live, but you get my point, okay? So we have our hashtag, and I'll just say, this is camel case. Which show are you watching on Netflix? There we go. So you do your regular tags that you do on Twitter. And then down here, you notice in my image, it says add description. That's pretty much where the alt text is coming in. And let's just say sure, there we go, okay. So I'll say Netflix logo, because that's what it is, and then I save it. Okay, so I have my post, my image, and the description, and when I'm ready, I can go ahead and tweet it out. So that's pretty much how you can very easily make your social media post on Twitter accessible. And also we were talking about the link shorteners with the bit.ly, and with captioning and audio, you want to make sure that whatever you post on there is also accessible. So I can actually create a bit.ly and share it like this, bit.ly Netflix, as opposed to typing out a really long URL that's like, oh, who knows, like it's almost gibberish, like netflix.com/ whatever the numbers are, you know, that's way too long. So you want to keep it concise. Okay, so that's a little bit about social media accessibility. Anything that you post, you want to use plain language, keep it simple, use camel case hashtags to make things readable, add a description to your image, post videos that are accessible using the caption practice I shared earlier, and finally, link shorteners to give us the quickest, simplest URL. To wrap things up, the last thing I want to share with you is around websites. And you might not be creating a website, but this actually might apply more to someone like Aaron, because I know Aaron creates websites. I know I keep calling Aaron out, but so when
we love you, Aaron.
So when it comes to creating websites, Aaron actually did a really good job with this, because there's a few things that we want to keep in mind. Now, I'm sure all of you have access to your school's remote learning website, and not all of them look the same. I think there's probably some similarities on the websites in terms of you might find pages that are directed to teachers, students, social emotional learning, resources and the like. Well, but some of those pages might have a lot of text on them. They may not be making the best use of images. So anytime you create a website, you want to use what we call the POUR principles. Yes, this is actually a thing in website accessibility. Is the site perceivable, operable, understandable, or robust? So perceivable, think about colors. We talked about that earlier. Talk about font sizes, adding captions, having alternatives to text. So if you are making it so it's easy to navigate visually, then you are already on the right track. Operable, can we actually move around the site? I can say that a lot of sites for shopping fail this test. I'm going to tell you this right now. Ladies, if you've gone shoe shopping, you've probably seen a lot of pop-ups, and it drives me nuts. It is not operable if it's doing that, because you need to be able to navigate the site. Understandable, think about the reading level. Like this is what Nick was talking about, like what kind of language are you posting on the site? Can people actually read it? Is it just overwhelming you? Just making it as clear and simple as possible. And then finally, robust. Can we access all the content on various devices? If we're using our phone or if we're using a computer, can we find things? Or are we getting pop-ups? I was actually having a conversation with my partner the other day, and we were talking about how we go on websites, there's a lot of ads that come up, things for cookies, things for newsletter mailing lists. All those websites are failing this test by doing that. They should not be doing that. And there are ways to get around that by putting in ad blockers. One of my favorites is actually AdBlock Plus. I use that on any news website I go on, and it works on the computer, but not on my phone. So we have to play around with that. I will tell you that Erin Knoll's website that I'm referring to is the Digital Learning Commons, or the Virtual Learning Commons, and it actually does pass this test. So I would let him know it passes the POUR principles test. He makes very good use of images and blocks, doesn't have too much text. But I'm sure Erin has had a lot of practice to get to that point, you know, being someone who curates a lot. And that's another thing to keep in mind for all of you, is that it will take some time. But just know that anytime you go to a site, that you shouldn't be having this experience. It should be easy to navigate, not confusing, and you ultimately find what you need to be looking for. All right. With that being said, we do have some more links to share with you as well. So one document I feel like it's important for you to know in particular is the Assistive Technology Features Guide. If you are working with students who might be going on various websites where they need to access any of the things that I'm talking about, some of these AT features will be helpful to them. I do want to distinguish between universal design and assistive technology. So when it comes to universal design, we are being proactive about design. We are saying, okay, we're creating a website, we're creating a video, a document, and trying to make it accessible to the widest range of learners. For example, I, in general, try to make sure that every video I share is captioned, because I'm a user who needs it, and I know that it benefits a lot of people, right? So universal design is thinking with that mindset of, I'm creating something that everyone can access. However, universal design does not take away the need for assistive technology. And assistive technology is very personal to the user. So this is where this chart comes in handy for you to say, okay, you know, I've done everything I can to make this website, this document, this video accessible, but my learner still needs more support. What can I do? This is where you can check out this document. I'm going to post the link in the chat for you right now so you can see it. It's called the AT Features Guide. Let's say you have a particular learner who might struggle with too much text. For example, Erin might, yes, Erin's site passes the POUR Principles test. However, there might be a student on there who, for example, needs it to be further simplified, or the student needs contrast. right? Because Erin's background, I can tell you, has white background and there's images on top. But some students might need that to be inverted to have a black background. Now, you aren't going to necessarily change your site, but you can recommend something like an assistive technology feature that would allow that student to convert that website for their specific use. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now, inverting color on a web page is related to vision. So let's go to the vision category and check that out. See what some suggestions are. Now, a lot of students are using Chromebooks, so you might be making a Chromebook recommendation. But students also are using mobile devices. Maybe they're using another one. This is where we can check it out. So right here we have for screen reader, there is a Chromebooks on there, and then low vision supports, there we go. So low vision supports for Chromebooks are Chromium, playing around with the settings, such as contrast mode, screen resolution, screen magnifier, large mouse cursor. So those are some things that you can use. Another one that you might consider using is a Chrome web extension called Dark Reader. I'm going to add that to the list actually because I just found out about this the other day. So what's it called? Dark Reader. So these are some things that you definitely should check out if you have a student who is saying, you know, I just need to read your website better, or I'm missing something. You can reference this for that individual student if you need. All right. So this document continues to be updated as we get more information. So if you don't see something here, please feel free to reach out to me. In terms of the general navigation of this document, we do have categories for communication, hearing, neurodiversity, physical and motor disabilities, reading disabilities, vision, and writing. So if you have a student who needs support in any one of these areas, please feel free to consult this document to help you with finding those accommodations. All right, with that being said, we do have more resources that we can share with you going forward. And I do want to make sure we are able to answer any questions in the chat before we pause the recording. Please know that if you need to reach out to myself or Nick or anyone on our team, you know, our resources are here on this website. Yeah. Our resources are on the website for you to consult with us. As I mentioned at the very, very beginning, this probably felt like you were drinking from a firehouse. There's a lot of information here, but just know that you probably came into this webinar wanting to make something that you're doing better for your students or your colleagues. If you are personally struggling with making your documents more accessible, then that's the first step you can take. If you're getting a lot of people saying, I can't understand what's going on in your videos, then maybe you make your videos more accessible. Maybe you are being told your website is overwhelming. Consult the POUR principles. So there's something in here for you to take away depending on a single student or large group of students that you're working with. At the end of the day, anything you do here is really going to help more than just one person. So thank you for your time. I'm going to pause the recording and I can answer any more questions in the chat. Okay.
And folks, now that she's